Hello and welcome to our Early Start Research Seminar, Working with Large Data Sets. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that wherever we are in Australia, we're meeting on Aboriginal country. Today, I'm at Early Start at UAW on Dharawal country. And this country stretches from southern Sydney in our north to Nowra in our south. We have our beautiful escarpment on the west and the ocean in the east. I recognise the connection to the land and waters and thank Aboriginal people for protecting this coastline and ecosystems. Here at UAW, we are physically at the base of Mount Keira, an area that has always been a place of great knowledge and learning. So with that, I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people. The purpose of this series is to focus on research methodologies specifically for early childhood researchers and to recognise and celebrate the expertise that we have at Early Start within our ASH faculty, UOW and our external networks. Many have participated in our previous seminars, both live and through our YouTube channel. In this seminar today, we're focusing on working with large data sets. And to do this, we have put together quite an impressive panel. Dr. Elena Vasseleu, who's a research fellow at Early Start, has an impressive background in psychology and as an early childhood educator. Her expertise is in self-regulation in early childhood, and she has a lot of experience working in large-scale projects, particularly focused on environmental observations. We're also joined by Dr. Allison Friedman-Krauss from NIEER, who is a great friend of us with our colleagues Steve Barnett and Ellen Friedman from Rutgers, the National Institute of Early Education Research. Allison has a lot of expertise in unpacking the impacts of early childhood interventions, with a particular focus on early childhood quality and cognitive and social emotional development. And again, has experience working in large-scale projects. And finally, on our panel today, we have our very own Senior Professor Tony Okely, who comes to us as an esteemed Early Start member, but also a member of our School of Health and Society here at UAW in our faculty. Tony has significant expertise in physical activity and children, and he certainly leads the international agenda. And that's evidenced with his Sunrise study, which has more than 40 countries involved in it at the moment, and really tracking the movement behaviours of children at a global scale. So enough from me. Let me pass on to Elena, because I know that there's a lot of really great insights and expertise to share with us.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, let me just get myself set up here. Okay, great. So, hi, I'm Elena. I'll jump straight in to the presentation today. Works? Okay, so during my almost 10 years at Early Start, I have been very fortunate to work on a number of large-scale RCTs conducted in early childhood and education services across New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, and South Australia. My roles across these various studies have been quite varied. I've gone from research officer to data manager to project manager to more recently a co-investigator and a chief investigator. Together, my work on these projects has involved engaging with over 30 research assistants, over 300 ECE services, over 600 educators, and over 3,000 children. I know when we think about working with large data sets, we often think about the immense task of entering, managing, and analysing the data. However, given that many of you joining us will likely be seeking out to collect your own original data set, I thought I'd take a bit of a step back for this presentation and focus on everything that goes into collecting and managing the large data set. So I was fortunate to get to work on 3 RCTs before my PhD research, which helped to prepare me. So this presentation is a bit of a culmination of the tips and tricks, the do's and don'ts that I've picked up along the way and I think might be useful for others. I've put some links throughout my slides, so if anyone does want a copy of these slides at any time, please reach out to me and I would be more than happy to share them with you. So in brief, I'm going to cover first preparing to collect the data and work with the large data set, then collecting the data, and then entering and managing the data. As you all know too well, when it comes to research, there is never enough time and there is never enough funding. For the most part, our projects are conducted within tight budgets and to tight deadlines. For RCTs, the time pressures are particularly heightened, where our windows for pre and post-test data collection are a lot more well-defined. To ensure the best possible outcomes, the bulk of your time should be spent in the planning as opposed to doing. So to begin, get organised. If you are managing the project, there will be a lot of information coming your way, from consent forms to hard copy data to digital data to scheduling information. So one of the first things I do to get ready is I set up my electronic storage. So I create folders and subfolders to put my existing files in and in preparation for files that will be coming to me. I also ensure that there's physical space ready to go in our filing cabinets for all data, hard copy data to be stored in at the end of each day. These data are sensitive and there will be a lot of it. So getting organised ahead of time is the best way to ensure data security and compliance with your research data management plans. Your system should be clear, accessible, and understood by others in your team. Again, these projects are often time sensitive. So if you need to take unexpected leave or you're uncontactable for whatever reason, it's important that others are able to easily access and navigate your systems to find whatever they need to find and to be able to jump in and help you if you need the extra help. As they say, the best time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. So get prepared. Staying organised. So when it comes to getting organised and staying organised, there are a number of really great programs out there that can help you. One that I like to use in particular is Trello. So think of Trello as your digital sticky notes. Use it to create, organise and prioritise your tasks. There's the option to add deadlines, upload relevant files or archive old notes. For those working in teams, Trello allows you to work collaboratively, so you can share and assign tasks to each other and report on your progress with each other. I've used this a lot in past in my different roles, so that various project managers could assign me roles or I could assign them to others, and we didn't have to sift through emails to try and trace back communication. Recently, I've been switching to Padlet, which is a similar style program, but UOW now holds the license for this. To keep my files tidy, I will often use Evernote as sort of my sketch pad for things such as meetings, creating quick to-do lists, drafting emails, or other documents. The option to sort, tag, and search notes easily in Evernote means that you don't have to try and remember that file name or search through your documents to find exactly what you're looking for. It comes with both desktop and mobile apps as well, which can sync to each other. So I'll often use my mobile app to make some notes if I get a phone call or I receive some new information when I'm out in field and I don't have access to my computer. You can also share these notes with others in your team and you can work asynchronously on editing different notes. So while you might not even have the data yet, there is no better time to start thinking about data entry than now. Depending on what data you're collecting, there are a number of ways to maximize efficiency that will make your life much easier during the data entry process. So for example, if you're planning to use Qualtrics for any survey data or electronic consents, there's the option to recode your values when entering the surveys. So using this tool, you can make sure that when you export your data, it will be coded in accordance with your desired coding principles, and the variable labels can also be renamed so that they're SPSS compatible, which I'll talk a bit more about that later. If you have already started collecting data via Qualtrics and you haven't taken advantage of this feature, don't fret, you can still go in and recode these at any time. So before you start recruitment, it's important to set up a communication log. Here's a mock log that I've created. And you'll use this across the life of your project. So you can include details, which in my case, I'm often communicating with early childhood centres. So you will include details about your last communication with maybe the centre director or someone else. And you'll note any outstanding action items that might have stemmed from that communication. You can use this for calls or email communication. Again, this will be extremely helpful should anyone need to jump in and help you with project management. At the end of the study, you'll need to report on the number of sites that might have declined or withdrawn from the study. So make sure you keep all information in your communication log. Don't delete anything. If you're working with a team of data collectors, I highly recommend utilizing Share software to do some of your scheduling. Using Google Sheets, I will often begin by populating data collectors' names and the dates of anticipated data collection, blocking these out in weeks. I will then give each data collector access to this Google Sheet via a secure link, and I'll ask them to initially populate their availability just in light green on the schedule and block out where they're not available. Once I have an indication of availability, I can start to map what centres people will be going to and when. And using the colour-coded system, I can indicate where something has been confirmed or something is still to be confirmed in the schedule. By using a Share software, I can ensure that data collectors have access to the most up-to-date information rather than emailing through multiple versions of things as the schedule might change. But if there are any significant changes, I will always communicate this to the data collectors directly before making them in the schedule. Given that the data collectors are accessing this document regularly, you can also use it to keep track of the hours that everyone has been working, and you can also use it to keep track of the number of children that are being assessed to see if you're reaching your targets. A small disclaimer to anyone that might want to use this approach, just make sure that you don't put any identifiable information about the sites or participants in your Google Share doc. You can see here I just list the name of locations and keep the information very vague. I have a site reference list that the data collectors can then use that's located in our server to locate where exactly they're going in those details. Okay, so after training and before sending data collectors in the field, I like to send a welcome package, which will just contain all the information they need via email. It includes extra copies of consents or assessment instructions, anything I think that they might need. And it also includes administrative information like how to lodge your timesheets or things like that. If you're using Dropbox or OneDrive, you might want to share a link to a folder that contains some of these documents. To ensure the protection of our testing materials and data, our team has invested in purchasing some secure, easily transportable tester kits that go out with data collectors each day. So at the end of each day, the data collectors will bring these kits back to our offices so we can store the data securely. There's often a lot of documents included within these tester kits, so I like to include a checklist that the data collectors can use to check off at the beginning of each day that they have everything, and then at the end of each day that everything has gone back into the kit. Should your data collectors be missing anything, like there's not enough copies of a certain document, they can always go to the welcome package and print these off remotely if need be. Okay, as I mentioned initially, we're often competing with tight budgets and tight deadlines. So I also create other sorts of checklists like how to schedule the day or how to schedule the assessments, which can really ease the pressure for planning on data collectors and mean they can jump straight into the day and assess as many children as possible. Okay, now on to the exciting part, collecting the data. And if I can foreshadow this with a quote from another one of the greats, just because you made a good plan, it doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. So my tips to you, if you're going into services or other sites to collect data, call ahead. A handful of times on probably every project I've ever worked on, there's always been occasions where our data collectors turn up to collect data and the children that they need to assess on are not there for whatever reason, or sometimes the centre might be holding an event and it's not actually suitable anymore to collect data. So it's important to call ahead the day before to make sure you're making the most of your data collector's time and also the funding for the project. Check. once the data starts coming in, it's essential that you check the data. Collecting data can be complicated and tedious, and there is often a lot of information and surprising circumstances that will come the data collector's way. For each data collector out in field, I like to ensure that I do a random check of data for every person across the first week of data collection. By checking this early, there's more opportunity to intervene and correct any miscommunications or errors in data entry that might be occurring early. Depending on the nature of your study and what you're collecting, things you might want to check: has a score been indicated for all questions, or is there missing data? Have appropriate notes been taken to capture children's responses? Are all necessary details being populated as instructed? Have start and stop rules been executed appropriately? We often encourage data collectors to work in pairs as well. So if you do this too, you can often get the data collectors to swap at the end of the day and check each other's work, which might also save you some time. Okay, one of the greatest little tools in your kit is going to be your tester logs. The tester logs will not only help your data collectors to keep track of who they're assessing in the day, but they're also going to give you really important information about what might have happened in the day that could inform how you might use the data, or if you might use certain data. So I put a mock schedule here. You can see that there might be some data that might not end up being used. And you can also see where participants might have declined to participate, or there might be a need to come back and collect some missing data. So it's a lot to expect data collectors to remember everything and communicate with that with you. So tester logs will be your savior. Oh, whoopsie. All right, lastly, entering and managing the data. So one tip I have for you, if you use paper-based surveys to do your data collection for whatever reason, and you're working with a large amount, if you have ethics approval to do so, consider using Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey to set up a template to enter this data into. Doing it manually through Excel can be quite fiddly, and it's much easier to make mistakes in coding. So I highly recommend considering this as an option. If you are using SPSS, which I'm sure a lot of people will, it's often best to first enter your data into Excel and then transfer it into SPSS. Now, when you're entering it into Excel, it's important that you try to make it as SPSS compatible as possible to save you a lot of trouble. So I put some different tips on this screen about what you can do to make it SPSS compatible, but I also have some links. And again, if you want me to share the slides, I'm more than happy to do so you can access those. One of the most key things is don't leave any cells blank. So missing data, if it's missing, make sure that you put a full stop, because if you put it into SPSS, it's going to change it to zeros and it's going to treat it as data that you have, and it's going to take it into account for analyses. All right, my last point is conducting data checks. There's lots of different ways that you can go about doing these data checks. I've got some tips here. We tend to use checks where we test a random 10%, and then if we find any errors, we increase the 10%. If you want to use this approach, one of my recommendations will be make sure when you're entering the data, if multiple data collectors are entering it, that they indicate who entered the data, so you can make sure a different person enters it on the back end. And finally, because I'm short of time, use version control and archive everything. This has been my saving grace through every single project. I have always had to go back and find my old files to check things, so cannot emphasize this last point enough. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elena. Allison, we'll pass over to you.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? First, I just want to say I agree with everything Elena just said in my experiences. She was spot on, and that's like, she gave really great advice right there. And yeah, I would love to just share this with my team too. But I'm Allison Friedman-Krauss, and I'm an assistant research professor at the National Institute for Early Education Research, which is part of the Graduate School of Education at Rutgers University in New Jersey. I lead a lot of NIEER's policy work, looking at different preschool policies across the states, our Head Start program. I'm involved in some of the field collection, field work at NIEER from time to time, though that's not currently my main role there. And I do spend a lot of time looking at using large data sets. And I'm actually going to talk a little bit differently than what Elena talked about. I'm going to talk more about using large pre-existing data sets that have often already been collected and what the benefits are, how to use those. I'm happy to answer questions though about both types of large data sets since I've worked on both of them. So in my experience as a graduate student, one of the real benefits of using pre-existing large data sets is that it's going to save you time and money. You don't need to find funding to collect the data. You don't need the extra time it does collect to take the data, to the time it would take, the year or so of just collecting and cleaning the data. The data sets are sort of generally clean once you get them. Of course, there are downsides too, like you might not be able to answer your specific question. If you have a really niche idea, it may not be answerable with a large data set, but many questions are. Using pre-existing large data sets, in my experience, have fostered collaborations with others in different universities using the same large data sets, particularly other graduate students. When I was a grad student, by their nature, they're large, which often gives you more power to answer your questions and to use innovative methods to answer those questions that you might not be able to do if you're collecting a smaller amount of data. In my experiences, they've afforded me an opportunity to answer old questions in new ways. And a downside, and it's a pretty substantial drawback, is that a lot of people are using them also. So you do need to be innovative. You need to have your specific, unique questions. And sometimes they're old and outdated by the time you get to them, but not always. So these are just some of the list of data sets that I have used. I found as a graduate student, I would go to talks and learn about other data sets that I never knew about. And so just hearing about those and figuring out, oh, does that have data that can answer early childhood education relevant questions? Some did, some didn't, but there's just so many of them out there that it's hard to know all about them. So just if you are interested in using a pre-existing large data set like this, it's worth just doing some research to find out what's out there. And so the data sets that I have on this slide that I've really used, the first set on top are pretty generally US national data sets. The one I've spent the most time using is the Head Start Impact Study, which I'll talk a little bit more in detail. On the next slide, there we have an early childhood longitudinal study. There's actually 3 of them. 2 of them follow children starting in kindergarten, going through, I don't honestly remember where they left off, but at least through 3rd grade. The other one started at birth, going through kindergarten, which has been a great source for early childhood education questions. They collected quality data in classrooms as well as child outcomes and family information. But it's at this point, it's really old. And so we're hoping the federal government will fund another one. The US Census is really a great source of data, usually, background data essentially, to contextualize your research questions. I don't know much about the Australian census, but in the US it's super complicated and I'm really still just trying to wrap my head around it because there's so many different versions of it. We have the National Survey of Early Care and Education, which is a basically supply side study. So trying to get a nationally represented picture of what's out there in terms of childcare for what age groups. Is it center-based? Is it home-based? What are the characteristics of the providers? And they've done a series of them. They're fielding it right now that will be able to assess the impacts of COVID on the childcare industry. And then there's the Head Start Program Information Report, which all Head Start programs, which are federally funded early childhood programs for children in poverty, are required to fill out each year. And it's great because you get information on the characteristics of the children enrolled in the programs, the staff enrolled in the programs, as well as the programs themselves. And then the second set of studies I have listed on this slide are ones more that they're not national federally funded data collection efforts. They're ones that I've either been involved in or collecting the data themselves, or faculty I worked with as a graduate student were involved in collecting them. So I'll talk about them because they are data sets out there that you might be interested in analyzing for dissertation research or research in general. The Family Life Project was a study that started at birth and has followed children at least through elementary school. They may still be actively following the children to middle and high school at this point, but it's about development of children in rural poverty, really focused on the whole child development measures of, salivary cortisol, so children's biological development, as well as math outcomes and vocabulary and sort of the more typical battery. And then they collected information on the schools that children attended, childcare children attended, families, parents, stress. It's a very robust data set. The Chicago School Readiness Project, I worked a little bit on data collection. This was my main advisor's project, where it was a randomized control child of Head Start teachers, and they followed the children through transitioning into college from when they were 3 and 4. So again, it's a great data set, and we had very, very organized methods for collecting the data, cleaning the data, checking the data as it came in. A lot of the procedures that Elena was talking about were employed as we collected that data, analyzed that data. It was a big group, big team. It was different in the sense that we contracted out to a firm to do the data collection. So we didn't have to worry about some of what Elena discussed in terms of scheduling things, but we did really have to do a lot of data quality control when the data was coming in, especially at the beginning, to make sure those data collectors were collecting the data in the way we wanted them to be. NIEER has our yearbook data, which is a totally different data collection, where every year for the last 20 years, we collect survey data. It's a very large Qualtrics survey that we do every year and have built these longitudinal data sets. And probably not very well. We have a lot of work to do to improve on the data sets, to make them really more usable. So it's maybe an example of what not to do, but another just data source that is out there if you're interested in state policies in the US on preschool. And then a NIEER study that I think my bosses, Steve and Ellen, may have talked to some of you about is a study about preschool quality in New Jersey. And one of the things we did in this study was to give all the children, it was about 1,000 children in the study, an activity band, and tried to get them to wear them for as long as we could. And the end result, well, it was getting data in 15-minute increments from 1,000 children over potentially a few months. So that is one very large data set that we are still trying to figure out how to clean and analyze and correct errors in. And when you talked, Elena, about things going wrong, and you plan and then your plans just go to the wind, well, that really happened with this part of our data collection. There was a lot of lessons learned and adjusting on the fly as we went through that. So the Head Start Impact Study, which I mentioned, I spent a lot of time in grad school on. Head Start is a federally funded early childhood education program in the US for 3 and 4-year-olds living in poverty. And the Head Start Impact Study was a randomized control trial that was intended to be nationally representative of the Head Start program in 2002. It had over 4,000 children that were randomized to either Head Start or control group at the center group level. They collected information on children, families, classrooms, teachers, schools, really pretty robust data collection. It was longitudinal, followed the children from 3 or 4 to 3rd grade. As I mentioned, a downside was that the data didn't become available until about a decade after it was collected. So it was sort of outdated by the time the data were available for the researchers to start analyzing it. In that interim, the federal government had put out their own reports, done their own analysis, but before it came publicly available, it was a decade later. So I worked on this data set in 3 different capacities. One, as a graduate student, I was part of a center called the Secondary Analysis of Variation and Impact Center, or SAVI. One of my advisors won a grant to reanalyze the Head Start impact study data with a focus on impact variation. And so this is where the innovation came in, I think. So we were a multi-institutional team bringing lots of different methodology trainings together to address this problem from a new perspective. They were interested, ACF is the Administration for Children and Families, and they are interested in understanding who did the program work for, under what circumstances did it work best, where did it not work for them. So I got to work with faculty across several institutions, several universities and institutions who brought different expertise and different methodologies, some pretty new, to the table. So it was a really great learning experience from that perspective. I was also able to use the data for 2 of my 3 dissertation papers. So through work in the center, I really got to know the data, the nuances of the data, and then I was able to take advantage of that to use it for my dissertation to answer questions that were unrelated to the SAVI Center, but were very related to my specific research interests for my dissertation. And then beyond that, I've also done other conference presentations using the data to address other early childhood education policy and development related questions. I think when you're using secondary data analysis from large data sets, it's really important to start, well, before you even get the data, accessing the data sometimes can be simple and sometimes can be a hurdle. With the Head Start impact study, it's a bit of a hurdle. You often have to fill out a whole data agreement, apply for the data, get IRB approval before you can get the data. In this instance, I can only analyze the data from a hard drive. That's when my computer's not connected to the internet, which is challenging because you always need to Google stuff, especially when you're writing code to do the analysis. But there's lots of different ways, and every data set is different in how you get the data and how you then access the data. But beyond that, it's really important to follow some of the same steps Elena was talking about when you're collecting your own data, to follow those when you're using pre-existing data sets. So really understanding the data, reading the reports carefully that have already been published. So when we were working on the Head Start impact study, we tried to replicate the pre-existing findings. So we knew we were doing it right. We're using the data the right way before we got into the trenches and started using new methods to analyze the data. The code books and the surveys are always available, and that's just really key to understanding what the data is telling you. So reading the code books alongside the questionnaires and the surveys themselves to help you understand specifically the question they're asking, how it's worded, any nuances there, and then how they're coding the data, how they're coding missing data, how they're not coding missing data, different types of missing data. Those are all sort of really important to understand and spend a lot of time planning those things before you get to do the data analysis. You often have to merge lots of files and build your own data sets because they'll come in, 30, 40 different little files, especially if you have, child level files, teacher level files, parent files, quality files over several years. You're going to end up with a lot of files that you need to then merge correctly. And as I mentioned at the beginning, also important to collaborating with others. When we started the Head Start impact study data, it was a new data set out there for early childhood education researchers, and a lot of people pounced on it. So we'd be going to conferences, presenting our work, and running into graduate students at other universities across the country also using it. And it was just a way to learn from each other, but also build new collaborations and friendships. So yeah, that's, I think, all I have to say. Hopefully this was helpful. I'm always happy to answer any questions. Feel free to reach out, send me an email if you're interested in this or anything happening in New Jersey. Love to connect. And thank you.
Thanks so much, Allison. Passing to you now, Tony.
Thanks, Lisa. Just confirming the slides are all viewed. Great, thank you. I would like to share experiences on working with large data sets, and I Googled the image large data sets, and this is what I found from R bloggers, and some people in our group use R, and I've never seen data that looks like that, so don't worry. I'm not going to walk you through what that graphic means, but maybe someone else can. I just wanted to start by acknowledging that we have a large group of researchers and students who do a lot of work with large data sets, who support a lot of the work being done that I'm going to present on today. And they are all found up in room 214 in early start. So thank you to those people for your contributions to the content in this presentation. I will draw largely on the Sunrise International study, which Lisa mentioned early on, and talk a little bit about our experiences working with the large data that exists and will exist into the future for this study. And again, this study has a coordinating centre which is based here at the university. And I certainly want to acknowledge the people that you see here in this photo who support the countries while they're collecting data, support countries all the way through the process for the study, from the initial expression of interest through to the training and preparation for the data collection, during the data collection phase, and then once the data have been collected, with cleaning and checking that, with having the data sets finalised, giving a copy of that back to countries, and then keeping a copy for ourselves that we can use for analyses. And for a study like the one I'm going to present, whilst each of the people in our team have specific roles, what we have learnt in this process, and this has certainly been a huge learning curve for myself, as well as I think our team, is the number who are involved with the data management side of the project. So we have Penny, who's our data management coordinator. We have also Ajinkia and Kahau, who do a lot of work around the analysis and the back end, ensuring that our systems work well, so that when countries enter data, when they have entered that, when we check that, and when we clean that. So there's a lot of work that happens here. And then we have Beck as well, who does a lot of work with communicating with countries around the data that have been collected. So certainly don't underestimate how much person power is needed for a large study that will result in a large data set, and just how valuable these people are to that whole process. There's no way that this study would be able to be conducted without the support that we have here and the people that contribute to the data management side of the project. So a special thank you to those. We have a number of aims with the study, and these represent things like looking at the proportion of children who meet the WHO guidelines, but then using that data to answer other research questions as well from a behavioural epidemiology framework. There's a strong focus, because we have many countries involved, on how we can work together to co-create knowledge. The study now has 57 countries with a specific focus on low and middle income countries. So as you can see there, the largest proportion of countries are from those two groupings. So when this study is completed, it will be a very big data set. So we're spending a lot of time now preparing ourselves for when we have multiple countries collecting data at the same time, which we have started to have over the past 6 months. But then as those countries transition from the pilot phase, which is a very small study, but it allows them to really test the feasibility and acceptability of the protocol in their country and in their context. It allows us to develop working relationships with the country teams, and it allows them to pilot the protocol in the sample, which is typical of the sample that they will need to recruit for the main study phase. So a combination of urban and rural children. And as you see here, the data set is quite small at the moment in terms of the number of children where we have finalized the data for them in their particular country. And you can see that we have about 31 countries that have completed this phase of the study, with another 6 currently collecting data. Now, assuming that that all goes well, we move into a main study phase, which obviously requires a lot more resources because the sample is 10 times as big and it's more broadly nationally representative. So it means that there's more travel involved in the country, depending on the size of it. And that means that the resources and the costs go up. So in a lot of cases, there's a lot of work that needs to be done beforehand to ensure that this study can be adequately funded. And you can imagine that once we, if we do end up getting somewhere around 50 countries that complete this, then that's a data set of about 50,000 children. So that does become a very large data set. So this phase of the study, again, has commenced in a large number of countries, with a number more expected to come on board with this phase after the successful completion of the pilot in the coming year. So we have a number of measures that are collected. These are the measures that are collected at the child level that you see here. And what I wanted to highlight is how we collect the data in terms of the management of it. And we recommend that countries use REDCap. And you can see here from Namibia, one of the data collectors assessing the child's height and the other one entering the result in REDCap. So REDCap is a software program that is available on both Android and iOS. It allows for the collection of the data using this app. We recommend that they use they use the iPads or the tablets to collect this, but you can also collect it on a smartphone as well. Now, not only are the individual level data collected using REDCap, but data that's collected at the family level, which is largely through a parent questionnaire, is also collected this way. And you can see here a data collector administering a parent questionnaire in the highlands of Papua New Guinea. So one of the benefits of this system for data collection is that it doesn't require Wi-Fi, that it is fairly user-friendly. You can translate the interface and parts of the questionnaire into different languages, which is what many countries where English isn't the first spoken language do. And importantly, it minimizes the errors that might occur if you're using a pencil and paper type of data collection form. So if you put in a value that's out of a normal range that you might expect, you'll get an error prompting you to go back and check that. If there's any missing data, it will also remind you that you haven't completed, or you haven't, the participant hasn't responded to a particular question, or you haven't completed a particular part of that survey. So again, it minimizes their things that you might have overlooked through the data collection process. And then there are steps along the way that we use to enhance the quality assurance. So we get each data collector to put in their name, and that is usually pre-populated. We've gone to a number basis now. So again, if there's anything there that we need to go back and check, we also have, in addition to what might be missing or a value that we might want to question, we have the initials of the data or the number of the data collector, so we can match up who collected the data on that particular person for that particular piece of data that we're questioning there. We also use the parent questionnaire to collect data at the community level, which again is largely through an interview type here. In countries where they don't use an interview, like they're doing here in a childcare centre in the Philippines, parents do have the option through REDCap to go online and complete the questionnaire online. We still do have a small number of countries where this is printed out and the parents complete it as a paper copy. So we usually do give countries the option in terms of the approach that they would like to use, whilst recommending the tablet for the reasons that I have, or the REDCap for the reasons I've just mentioned. But in many countries, the parents are available for the questionnaire to be completed as an interview. And that certainly we've found results in a higher quality of data with fewer missing data points. And then we collect data at the centre level as well. And again, we use a centre-based questionnaire, and we have that on REDCap, and this is typically completed by the data collector as an interview because they've got a ready audience, respondent in the director and the educators from the centre, so they can go through these questions with them, like you see here, the data collector doing in Tunisia with these questions. And again, we've found that administering this as a interview does result in better compliance and a higher quality of data. So once we've collected that data, what actually happens there? And there's a whole online data portal which countries use to enter some of the data. Now, one of the beauties with REDCap is that you don't, once you've collected that data, and as I said before, you don't need Wi-Fi to do that. But once you do come back in and you've got a Wi-Fi connection, it's very easy to then be able to send that data to the server. And when we say send to the server, where does it go? Well, it ends up at our coordinating centre, where it is checked, it is cleaned, and processes that we have documented are gone through to be able to confirm the quality of that data and to correspond with countries and follow up with them with any questions that we may have. So we use a system called Cloud Store, which you can see here for a particular, so this is the folder here for the pilot study. So we put all of the training materials up here. They're often translated, but the protocol manual in particular is something that's available. It's gone through extensively in the training, which we do with each country, but it's also available here for each country. So, and it's often translated so they can go back and check on things down the track, particularly if they've got any questions or any follow-up training that they would like to do. So all of these documents are there. We have PDFs of all components of the protocol manual. Again, we want to make sure that the data training, the protocol is delivered in a standardized way, exactly the same way each time to countries. And we do that by ensuring that we've got the materials available in hard copy form. And we also do have videos which explain some of the assessments as well, which countries have found very helpful. Here's what a REDCap screen looks like. And again, we take screenshots of this and put these in the protocol manual. So in addition to explaining it to the country teams, we can also, they've got the manual to go back to, so they've got a screenshot and they can make notes through the training of specific things that they might like to highlight. We have a particular section of the protocol manual that focuses on REDCap that we cover in the training, but again, they have the copy of this, and this includes screenshots of how to enter the data for every single assessment that is taken. And it also has screenshots to show countries how to send the data to the server once it has been collected. There's also a document that has been prepared by the team which outlines the quality assurance processes and protocols. And this again is gone through in the training. So it explains what to do to ensure that we have the highest quality of data possible to contribute to our data set. In addition, each country has its own folder in REDCap, in Cloud Store. And in each of those folders, there are a number of portals there where they can upload additional data that is not collected through REDCap. And it's also where we then communicate, and the processes around preparing the data set for analyses are undertaken. So let me just walk you through a couple. So to get to this point here, so this is the final data set for Ethiopia here. And there's been a lot of work that's obviously gone into getting the data set to this point from when the data were collected on REDCap. And you can see down the bottom of this spreadsheet here, all the different tabs with all the different outcomes or variables of interest for each of the participants. So one of the most important things for our quality assurance process is that we actually, in addition to countries collecting the data on REDCap, we get them to fill in this spreadsheet here. And that just indicates to us or to the coordinating centre if they've collected a particular variable and if they've uploaded that data. So we get them to complete this. It's just a very simple Y for a yes or N for a no, and that allows us to check. So we would expect that if we see, for example, the consent forms, if the data have been collected, yes, and it's been uploaded, then we should have that data here. So we can check, and if we don't have it, then we can come back to them and say there's something that's missing here. So this is a very important part of the training and part of the data quality assurance process. Countries do have to upload all of their accelerometer data, which is our primary outcome. So they do that through CloudStor, and then that data are checked and that data are prepared for analyses. In terms of data quality checking, so the team here, this is an example here. They've gone through the data for some of the different outcomes and they've identified some data that might be missing or something that doesn't look right. And this sheet here is completed, and then this is communicated with the country team. And then we have documented here their response. So we can then process whether the data are missing, whether there's a possibility that that data may still be collected, and what the outcome might be in terms of how we move forward with this particular piece of data for this particular participant. So obviously what we're trying to do here is minimize missing data. We then have a final data check that we see here, which has what the final outcome is. We can generate summary reports for countries if they particularly need something that's done at the end, in addition to giving them a copy of their data set, like you saw back there for Ethiopia. All these steps are outlined in collaboration agreements, which are developed with each country. And this also specifies aspects of how the data will be handled, privacy, ethical issues around the data. And this is very important. And this is signed by each of the countries prior to commencement of the study. And just finally, we do have also for the study, Penny has developed a quality assurance framework, which is very helpful just in outlining the steps that are taken to ensure that the highest quality of data are collected and ensure that our data quality steps and our data processes are both ethical, transparent, and appropriate. We cover aspects of data management in our publication policy, and this is completed for each of the publications that arise from the study. And we've documented a lot of this in our protocol paper, which you see here, which is published in BMJ Open. It's an open access publication there. We put all of our training videos, which the Coordinating Centre have done an amazing job in preparing. We put all these on YouTube, so they're easily accessible by countries, and they're able to use those as well to ensure that if they've got any questions or anything they need to go back and check, they can. So I will finish there. You can see the email address and social media for both myself and the Sunrise Centre if you have any further questions. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Tony. What a terrific set of presentations we've had. For our last seminar series for 2022, we're certainly going out with a bang. Well done. I just have a couple of questions that I'd like to direct specifically to individuals on the panel, if I may. The first question I wanted to ask was to Alison. Alison, thank you for sharing with us ways that you can use existing data, and you challenged us to really think around innovative ways to use existing data. I wonder if you might have some hints to think about to how we might get to that innovation in using a data set.
That's a really good question. I think in my case, I was fortunate to come into a project where the innovation had already been sort of thought out a lot of in the grant application. And so I came in after the fact. But at the same time, we had a problem. We wanted to look at how random assignments at Head Start impacted quality. But the problem was that there was a lot more missing data when the children were not randomized to Head Start. So we were just sort of forced to be a little innovative and research different methodologies that could potentially get around that problem within a causal inference framework that was very important to that project. In the end, we probably didn't quite get there. We had other ideas that didn't have enough power to do it, despite the fact I did say that large data sets give you more power. I think finding examples from other fields sometimes is really helpful. That like economists, sociologists often use methods that early childhood education researchers haven't used but can learn from, and vice versa too. So sometimes like an interdisciplinary approach is really helpful. And I think the projects I've worked on have benefited from that a lot.
Thanks, Alison. I think that's really great advice. Elena and Tony, you talked a lot about the relationships that you have to manage along the way as well. I wonder if you have some clues and some hints for us around how to keep your research participants updated, and how much and what do you share with them along the way? Who would like to start?
Look, communication is probably arguably the most important aspect of our study. Relationships are everything. Trust is everything. We have to build that trust with probably all countries. And that certainly helps facilitate a lot of the communication that occurs throughout the process. It helps with challenges that may come up through the data collection and management process. Communication is obviously just that bit more challenging when you don't speak the same language. But having said that, I think our coordinating centre do a phenomenal job. In two ways, they communicate very quickly back to countries. So when countries are collecting data, if something doesn't look right, if they're having a problem with REDCap, and sometimes that happens, then, you know, they identify for us the problem, and then you know, we try and get back to them as quickly as possible, ideally, you know, within 24 hours. And because we know how urgent it is, because sometimes they only have a window in which to collect this data. So we do a lot of work on that, and that communication, I think, has been a strength of the study. Country teams comment about how well the coordinating centre communicate with them, how helpful they are, and that builds up that trust, which is a big part of our study. The other thing we've done is, because a lot of that is over email, I probably have on my phone 5 or 6 countries where we've got WhatsApp groups, and, you know, that way they can communicate with me via that, and that can come through at any time of the day. And so again, you know, that can be a really helpful communication tool in addition to the email.
Yeah, and I guess for us, where we're working with centres, particularly ones that might not have had as much involvement with early start so far, at the beginning, we try to make sure we have a consistent person that's the contact person on our end. So really building the relationship as individuals first. I'll often invite centres to elect a key person for contact that works for them. And I'll also try and work out what their preferred mode of contact is. Things are always going to be communicated in writing via email, but I like to check with centres if they prefer phone call updates or things like that. In the last RCT we ran, we also tried to establish a bit of a community of practice among our intervention centres. So we had monthly teleconferences that all the participants could come to. Anyone in the centre was invited to come, and from the feedback, that was really valued. So there was a lot of great communication between our participants then happening as well. So, yeah.
Thanks, Elena. So many wonderful messages. You've talked to us in this session around the importance of planning, working beforehand, before you start collecting the data, thinking around what data can look like, the importance of quality. So many really important messages. Big thanks, Elena, Alison, and Tony. Thank you for finishing off our 2022 seminar with such great insights.